Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade, and this is the Education Show, and I am delighted to be here with Todd Oppenheimer. Todd, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I appreciate the interest. I hope I can help.
For those of you who may not know, Todd wrote a prescient article and then book about education technology and schools. The article was called The Computer Delusion. The book was called The Flickering Mind, and it's almost 30 years ago that this all happened. I was a young Senate aide in DC, and Todd, who were you in 1997?
At that time, I was a reporter and writer for Newsweek in their first digital sort of Newsweek interactive phase. So I was inside the tent peeing out.
Well, it was an amazing article, cover story with great visuals suggesting that computers and schools were not going to work out as well as people thought. And then, of course, the book. Can you give us the backstory about how you found the story, how you wrote it, and then how it got to be in what was then, I think, still called the Atlantic Monthly?
It's called the Atlantic now, but yes, it was the Atlantic then, Atlantic Monthly then. Well, I had done a little bit of writing for the Atlantic. I'd done a couple of articles that were smaller, um, but how I came upon the story is this is interesting because it's so apropos to some of the critiques of digital technology today. I mean, it's exactly the same. It's amazing. Back in '94, when Newsweek
Okay.
hired me to be basically their first correspondent for Newsweek Interactive, and to prepare for that, because we were going to be going and interviewing people on tape and trying to do this multimedia stories, with some graphics and sound interviews and something a little bit like probably what you and I are doing right now. So to help and so that I could do some of my own editing, they sent me to an editing workshop. And just a year or two before, I had been doing a little bit of radio reporting. I was living in Portland, Oregon, and I was getting schooled by senior correspondents there who were cutting tape, who were literally cutting
With,
8-track
with a
tape
with a
in order to edit
with a
their
razor,
stories
right?
with a razor. And their ear of when they could hear a mumble or a pause or the cut they wanted was unbelievable. They would play this thing, and to you and I, it would sound like, and they'd go, wow, with the razor. A razor, you don't get that back, and nail it. And I was just gobsmacked, and I knew it was going to take me months to master that, but I didn't do much more, but I just remember that. Then I go into this class, and it's all on computer. And you can make any sort of mistake and retrieve it. You can do it over again. You can change it in all sorts of ways. And I thought, what convenience? Yes. What skill, what incredible skill that was unique to this craft is being lost. And it started to bother me. And even though I was continuing to work and propel this, I was being brought to workshops and so on. And I was lucky enough to hear Neil Postman, the great technology critic, speak at a Harvard workshop. And he said, I worry about all this. This was just the very beginning of emails. He said, everybody's got all their friends. They're boasting they've got 100 friends or 200 friends. This is like sandbox stuff compared to what it is now. He said,
Right.
how can you have that many friends? If you have that many, if you have that many friends, are you really responsible to them? And isn't responsibility to people crucial to friendship? This also got me thinking. So I started adding these things up, and I started reading more and more about every so often and this was when uh, uh, Bill Clinton and Al Gore were gangbusters for computers in schools, and so
Right.
were
Inter-
more and more people, and of
Internet.
course the corporate sector couldn't get enough. And
Sorry to interrupt.
I started,
This is the internet superhighway. This is the E-rate. This is the era of incredible enthusiasm for technology in schools.
right, right, and it had not existed before. I mean, a lot of people living today don't even know there was a time when this was not a thing. Um, So I started poking at it and poking at it. I did a story about it for Newsweek. They had only room for a small part of it, and so I did a larger treatment to the Atlantic, and they took it. And the editor there, the great Bill Whitworth, who unfortunately is no longer with us, was prescient enough to see that this could be big, and we made it big, and won a national magazine award for it, which was a big deal. And of course, that led to the book, and then that book came out in 2003. It was about 6 years of research, going back to a lot of some of the schools I'd written about and plenty more. Spending a lot of time in Harlem, visiting. I tried to visit. I got so pilloried for the article. I sort of promised the ed tech community that when I did the book, I would go visit the best of their crowd. I would go visit all the schools they thought proved that technology was a great thing. And I almost never saw it. There'd be a little bit of good, but much, much more bad, to put it bluntly. So anyway, we should move on from the past and talk about today. But you asked the question.
No, the past is important. And again, because we're going through this big ed tech backlash right now, people are asking about personal devices, about one-to-one devices in school, about social media access, about YouTube, about some of the software programs, which from some of the accounts I've read aren't that much better at helping kids go forward easily and smoothly as an expert teacher might help them go forward as 30 years ago. No, this is incredibly important. And I think there are a lot of lessons here for the current crop of reporters who are writing about this. And here's why. There seems to be both enthusiasm at what I'm going to call the network level for skeptical coverage of ed tech. I think all the nightly news broadcasts have run something about it. NBC News Digital has done a bunch of pieces
outside.
about it.
Hold on one sec. I'm going to close the door.
Okay, don't worry about it.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's all right. There's also a resistance or a reluctance to ask questions about technology that I see or glean from the stories, a skepticism about the backlash. So I'd love to hear more, if you don't mind, about being pilloried. Obviously, the story was incredibly high quality. The Atlantic put it on the cover. You won the award. But it sounds like, what did people say about you or about the article that a reporter today might also experience?
Well, it's interesting. I looked up a little bit the backlash or the critiques that one of the newest writer to this, interestingly, borrowed a piece of the Atlantic's title. I don't know if he did it knowingly or not. He has a book out. His name is Peter Cooney Horvath or something. He's a neuroscientist. He has a book out. I think it might even be self-published, called The Digital Delusion. And from what I can tell, it's a good book. I mean, I think it's based on more science, or he had more science at his disposal to base his argument on than I did. But the critiques that he's lancing at are the exact same ones that I was. And I also have to say, in the book that I wrote, in 2003, the first chapter is looking at the history of promises about technology in the classroom, starting in the early 1900s with Thomas Edison. And I'm not saying this to puff myself up as being this great soothsayer, just as only to point out how replete the record is with promises falling short generation after generation after generation. And the reason is possibly made even more clear by today's research than what I had at my disposal, which is, and this is, I think, Horvath's main point, that the biology of learning, the biology of the way we take in information, understand it, remember it, and make meaning of it is antithetical to the way we interact with technology.
Right.
Now, I'm avoiding your question. Let me, before we go down that path more, and we can. The criticism is always, oh, I'm being a Luddite. I'm ignoring the future. Technology is here, and these kids need to. All the youngsters need to be able to work with it and be fluent in it, so that they're digital natives, and so they've got to be good at it. And of course, now AI has brought it to a whole other level. Before AI got going, cell phones and constant communication that way was spreading it beyond what it was before. It's also, this is the oldest one. Oh, there's nothing evil in it inherently. It's just a tool. It's like any tool, like a hammer is a tool. What are you going to do? Take a hammer away from a carpenter? Uh, it's not that simple.
Right.
One of the best quotes I ever got was when I was writing this story, and I interviewed some teacher, and we talked about it. And the teachers, the good ones, the veterans, they know they're getting a hoax pulled on them, a scam. And they said, when I was a young teacher in teaching school, this has been in the 70s or something. So we were always taught the more muscle, the more memory. Think about that. The more muscle, the more memory. And that is essentially what Horvath's neuroscience has found in spades. That you can be more facile with digital technology. You can generate more material with digital technology, but you experience it on a superficial level. It doesn't stay in you, doesn't stay in your body. Coincidentally, an article that I wrote, actually, I think it was after I wrote The Computer Delusion, was about the Waldorf schools. And a lot of people know about those. And my children went to them partly as a result of my discovering them and writing about them. The Waldorf schools, I'm sure they're struggling now because technology is just everywhere. They've always been very, very non-technical, very old school, very old school. When they teach math to the young, the kids in first and second grade, they make them stamp out the numbers. They teach them through rhythm. They use their bodies. They're in the sandbox making stuff. They make their own textbooks with crayons and colored pencils. They just involve the five senses as much as possible. That's sort of the simplest way to look at it. If you don't have several of your five senses involved, you're missing the boat. It's just you're getting you're skimming the sour cream off the top. Anyway, I can go on and on this way, but yeah, you go ahead and let me. You ask another question.
No, it's helpful and interesting. From my perspective, remembering back to 1997, the story that you wrote was incredibly brave and frankly jarring, right, for that era, because it was going against the stream, right? We're in Clinton 1 or Clinton 2. I've forgotten which we were at that time, but the enthusiasm was very strong. And I was working for a senator who was on the education committee, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for getting computers and internet and everything out to everybody. Did the article, looking back, did the article have any impact in terms of giving people a moment to pause or rethink? When you went back and were working on the book, for example, did you find anyone who'd said, "Oh yeah, we decided to go slow or to do things differently because of the book? I'm sorry, because of the article, the initial article.
Right, right, right. That's a great question. Um, I would say, and this is based on a very small sample, so I can't be too definitive about it. But based on those I spoke with, I don't think I. Well, there was one school. There was one school administrator who borrowed. Actually, it was after the book came out, and this is here in San Francisco. And he had me come and visit his classes. He read the book thoroughly. He came to my house. He thanked me. It's a very good school. It is a Jesuit school, not surprisingly, because the Jesuit schools are really rigorous and grounded, really grounded.
Yeah.
So there's one where I think I may have steered things, but in general, and this was the headmaster who I was speaking with, but in general, I think it was more the teachers, individual teachers, being able to say this or that, or regretting what the direction their schools were taking, or making a plea for keeping their classroom simple, having a little support for not wanting a bunch of computers in their classrooms. But the tidal wave was so strong, I don't think for the most part there was a lot of victory there. When I was on the speaking circuit with this, which I was for a few years, I used to say, I'm always on the losing side of this battle, so I'm always news. So
Amazing.
anyway, yeah, that
there
may have been other issues that I was just going to say there may have been other schools that didn't reach me. Go ahead.
You didn't find, between the writing of the article and the writing of the book, you didn't find, just to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, there was no widespread reconsideration going on, even though the book and the article would end up both being very popular.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, that would have taken a study. If it's helpful, I mean, I was invited to a lot of panels, and I was always the naysayer on the panel. It was always 3 or 4 people talking about how great everything was going to be, and a lot of them were from industry, and they had the latest thing. And I was the one trying to get them to look at their conscience and at what they were asking these schools to spend and what they'd had to show for it so far.
How did you?
Yeah.
How did you? One of the things I've noticed about journalists who find an important story, write an article or a series of articles, or then write a book, is the challenge of staying journalistically curious, and not becoming an advocate or closing down their own minds to reconsidering. So, how did you learn anything that made you reconsider your initial conclusions from 1997 to 2003? That's when the book came out. Did you reconsider or reevaluate your own views along the way? Did you find anything that gave you pause?
That's a really, really good question. And that was something I kept in the back of my mind and in the bottom of my stomach throughout the reporting for the book, because I knew I had to be. I just had to be. I couldn't write a book that was just an expanded polemic. First of all, I wasn't going to sustain my interest for the 4 or 5 years it took, and it wasn't going to be fair. And I heard enough people genuinely upset by what I wrote in the article that I felt just sort of morally obligated. I would say a couple things. Plus, I also had a couple of really great sort of advisors looking at the manuscript who were in the field and were of balanced view. One was Sherry Turkle, who wrote a lot of great books on the same topic. She had a very measured view about technology. She got more critical of it as time wore on and as technology became more widespread. I think her biggest one was sort of when the cell phone craze went nuts, and she had a book called alone together, why we are closer to our devices than we are to each other. Something close to that. So she was great. But another guy was a wonderful, wonderful man. I think he's not alive anymore, named Judah Schwartz. And Sherry was at MIT and I think Harvard. Judah Schwartz was also at Harvard. And it was a great, I just have to say this. Judah Schwartz is Jewish. I am Jewish. There is something about a younger Jewish person going to the elder, typically the rabbi, for advice and being set straight, and that older person keeping the young person's best interests at heart while also setting them straight. And we developed that relationship and kept that for 5 years. So he would correct me when I needed it, and that helped a lot. So I tried to really stay honest, and I tried to really stay open. And I will say the one thing, there were a couple things that came up. There were things I learned about that I didn't know, of course, in the article. I mean, I probably spent, I don't know, 6 months on the article and 6 years on the book. So there were things I ran across. One of them was a really cool technology that I liked. There was a guy named Tom Snyder who popularized something called the one computer classroom. And he said, that one computer was the teacher's. And so the teacher used it to facilitate discussion. And Snyder had this great quote. He said, "The classroom is one of the last public spaces that we have in our society that is built for conversation between people, that is for explorative, dialectic conversation. We have to preserve that. This is precious. So use the computer to fuel that. Don't let the computer come in and quiet that and dilute and distract from it." So, the classic example was, social science simulations, war games or something, and the teacher would use the computer and have a projection and project on the screen, well, what happens if the U.S. invades Iran? Well, what are the, what might be Iran's response? And, you over here, if you were the Secretary of State, what would you do? And if you were you're Iran's war general, what would you think? And, and so you use it. And now with the research resources available, that could be, extremely fertile. So that was one. The second one was for certain kids with certain kinds of learning disabilities, the computer can be really good because certain kinds of things have to just be repeated over and over and over. And if you have bad learning disabilities, it's not something, if you're a youngster, that you're inclined to do yourself. If you're the teacher, you don't exactly want to sit there for 2 hours and go through the same drills. So to have a computer do it can be a great thing. So those are the two things I remember. I think there were some others, but those were the standouts.
But nothing that caused you to rethink your basic premise, which is this is not going to be as helpful to kids as people are saying.
No, most definitely not.
I've got one more question about the past, and then I want to ask a little bit about the present and the future, because there are any number of journalists out there right now thinking about or working on their version of the story you wrote in 1997. Did anyone else in the journalism community join you in writing tough-minded but fair, I'm presuming, coverage of the ed tech tidal wave? Were you truly alone, or were there other fellow travelers?
Well, this is going to sound very self-aggrandizing, but when I wrote it, I was the first. I mean, that's one of the reasons. I mean, there were small things, maybe. There was a guy who was editor of the Harvard Education Letter, who was a big critic of technology. His name was Ed Miller. And so to the extent he wasn't really a journalist, but it was some of his writing that got me down the path I went in the Harvard Education Letter. So to an extent, he was one of them. But no, there was everybody had swallowed the Kool-Aid, so that's one of the things that made it a cover story, and that's one of the things that gave it its award. And then I, at one point after I got the National Magazine Award, I got interviewed by a New York Times writer who covered technology, and she wrote a little profile about me, and as if I was some big deal, describing that I had a beard and all that kind of thing that they do when they want to puff up somebody. And at the end of the interview, she closed her notebook. She said, I want to congratulate you, said, and I also want to tell you, I had been thinking something about this, and but you got to it before I did, which is very frustrating. And I said, oh, that's happened to all of us. Don't worry. So I think there were others on that path, and this is the part I feel badly, I don't want to be too self-aggrandizing, but I kind of squatted over the territory. And when you write a story that's a cover story for the Atlantic, especially in those days, and then all the media that came from it, and I was on television and all on the radio and everything, if you're a good enterprising reporting, it's like, well, got to put that one in the drawer. That's already been covered. So I think other people started to write critically, but nobody went, why would you?
So people didn't feel like they had to follow. I know outlets hate to follow each other, which is one of the features of journalism that I hate the most. It sounds like you were booked for shows. There was no resistance to booking you or having you at panels, and I'm glad to hear that. But the Times and NPR and AP and all the other bigwigs out there, they didn't even reluctantly join you, if I'm understanding your recollection correctly.
No, I mean, they would have me on as their version of that story.
But they weren't.
I mean, I'm sure there were some who did write about it that I didn't see. I wasn't watching for that hugely, but I wasn't aware of any.
The only person I know.
There was one big network show that did a big thing, and I mean, this is classic TV trick. They did a big show. They called me up. They said they wanted to make me the center of the story. What are all my sources for all this and that? And I naively gave them a bunch of my sources. Off they went. It was like I think it was one of those ABC 2020 things, the one with Ted Koppel back in the day.
Yeah.
And did this huge story, and I featured in it for about 30 seconds. So it looked like they had thought of it. They had done the research. It was their idea from the beginning, and they found this guy who'd written something about it, which is classic TV trick.
It's classic journalism. The only person I know who's been on this story on and off in the more recent years, and has also been pilloried and marginalized for it, is a woman named Audrey Waters, who's had a newsletter and she's an independent journalist. She's written a bunch and written a book about this as well. But the marginalization, until right now, basically, but the marginalization of the critique or the just asking the questions has been very, very strong. And the only way, this is my pet theory, or maybe everyone's pet theory, but the only way that the ed tech backlash happens now in 2026 is John Haight's work on cell phones and kids and getting cell phones out. Every one of the educators I've talked to who's gotten tech out or reconsidered in their schools has said, well, the first step was we decided we had to do something about personal devices. And once they realized that was possible, then they started thinking, well, what about this janky software that the district keeps buying for us that the kids hate? But hate, comes at this from the academic side,
Right.
Audrey came at this from the journalism side, and she's been doing valiant work spitting into the wind for a long time.
Right.
Here's
Well, I'm on to other subjects now, and I'm actually writing about a subject that blends these two for a reason I'm going to get to in a second. I just thought of another writer who did do some somewhat critical reporting, and that was a New York Times reporter named Matt Richtel. I
oh
think
right,
he
I know
writes
Matt.
about but he was writing somewhat critically about it, not exactly my story, but related to it, and I think digging up his own discoveries that I didn't, that was outside my scope or didn't find. So he was doing good work.
Right.
The uh, I want to spin this forward a little bit. Thank God bless Jonathan Haidt. I mean, what he has done to help this forward is huge, and he's got a name. He knows his stuff. Um, he's I guess he calls himself, I think, a social psychologist or something. And we've written. I publish um, an online magazine as it is. I don't have the money to make it print. I would if I could, but it's about craftsmanship and basically taking a craftsman perspective to all kinds of issues in the world, not just artisans, but any sorts of all kinds of developments and challenges. And um, so we have written about Jonathan Haidt and his work with politics, which is brilliant and was groundbreaking when he first started writing about it. I think back in, I think it was the mid to late 90s. Anyway, so what he is finding and the links he's drawing between what social media is doing to kids is great. There have been two, that's helpful. The other big help was COVID.
Okay.
Because every family saw how horrible it was for these kids' education to be turned into this crappy screen. And the reporting and the knowledge is everywhere about how behind some of the kids who were in the crucial grades, I think mostly the middle school grades, during those COVID years. I have two kids, and fortunately, they somewhat escaped it, mostly escaped it, but that's huge. And so I think people realize, like, enough is enough. And I have a son who's a teacher in a very challenged public school in Memphis, Tennessee, and even that school, as struggling as it is, no cell phones in classes, which is fantastic. I mean, that's that should have been obvious from the get-go that had to be a discovery.
Right.
Is bizarre.
Right.
The second thing that is shaping things is AI, and I'm sure you were planning to get to that, but might as well go there. Obviously, everyone's freaked out. No one knows how it's going to turn out. It's going to be huge, whatever happens. Hopefully, we'll eventually get some guardrails on this thing. The kind of reporting that's coming out now. I don't know if you're aware of a new book by a guy who worked in AI called "If Anyone Builds It, You Will Die."
Huh.
This is a guy who'd been working inside the AI world since 2014. So he knows his coding, he knows his technology, and he believes that AI, first of all, we by our nature cannot help ourselves cannot resist making a machine that's smarter than we are. We're just going to do it because we can. And once we do that, it will essentially take over, have a mind of its own, seek its own self-preservation, abetted by our extinction. This is literally this guy's argument, and it's unbelievable. I mean, it's so extreme, but and I'm sure plenty of people in the IR world are arguing against it. But now we have the guy of Anthropic sitting with the Pope to say, "Hey, let's put some brakes on this." So we may have gotten to some point of realization. But the reason I brought up AI is not so much for that. I don't know if you're aware of it, but Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, just made a big commencement address. I can't remember, to some Ivy League school, and was
Yeah.
booed hugely.
Yeah.
Flip that over, and there's a journalist, a New York Times journalist named Jodi Kantor. Now, she's someone
Right.
who's probably is doing some very enterprising reporting where I have left off, um, who has a very interesting set of suggestions for young people of how to deal with this onslaught of AI. And she made a commencement address that was not booed. In fact, it went viral. And her main case was, if you're thinking about what sorts of jobs you're going to have and what job might be safe from AI, think about what your interest is. It has to be something you're absolutely passionate about. It has to be genuine. It can't be just, well, what's a career? And the reason for that is you have to begin to think of it, and these are her words, like a craft, like a craft. And if you think of it like a craft, what you become is a master of all things related to that subject, um, a defender of it, an innovator with it. You know, as we know, in any good discipline, you can't innovate until you understand everything that you're using to innovate with. If you can do that with any of your interests, even if it's carpentry, even if it's probably, data processing, which, those kinds of things are supposedly most a threat to AI. But if you are master of it and you can think of new ways to use it or whatever, very likely you'll be okay. They will find a use for you.
One
So
last question. That's
yes.
so helpful. Thank you so much. One last question. Would you share any insights or advice for a current journalist, education editor, someone who's trying to bring craft to their work on this topic? Are there things that you would encourage them to think about or to do or to not do, avoid doing based on your experience?
Uh, well, the first thing that comes to me, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to me is one of the oldest rules in the book is slow down, stop and think. Don't be in a rush. There's so much information out there. I mean, if you write for a daily paper, unfortunately, you've got or a daily news outlet, blog, who knows what, you've got to publish. But resist the temptation to just write everything on some topic, think that you've done it justice and move on. Write what you have to for that day, but save your notes if you can. And if you can get more time, do it. And just stop and think. There was a book written many years ago called News Thinking. And that's what it argued for. Don't just transfer what you just got told. I mean, this goes with what we were talking about the problems with learning on a computer versus hands-on, manipulative, full body learning. Think about what it means. Think about what everything adds up to. And think about then what would be the next questions you want to know, and who would you interview, or where would you go for that information? A lot of the times now, because of AI, you can do it with, you can find out a heck of a lot. But think about what that means. Go look at the source. I mean, this is obvious. Any result you get from AI or anything, find the source of it. Don't ever quote directly from what you get spewed. Look at the source, go check that source, make up your own mind about what's salient from that source, what's quotable, whatever. But I guess my overall thing was, try to stop and think and make more meaning of what we write. Because everything you write could have the meaning of a book. if you have the time. I mean, the old saying, we can understand the whole world if you can understand what's on the head of a pin. So in today's world, I mean, that's what I do in my magazine. I publish stories that most magazines would turn down because we just ponder it. We think more deeply about a guy who makes a knife, a person who's making a sluice dam for conserving water, the craft of water conservation. We just think about it and dig deeper than anybody else has. That's how we get our stories. And most of our stories are things you won't see anywhere else, just because we've thought about it and thought, like, where can you go deeper? Everything's been written about almost. You can't find a new topic, but you can find a new layer to a topic. So that would be my thing.
That's excellent. The most interesting thing I've read on the current ed tech backlash, and this speaks to the issue of the dangers of superficiality in either direction. But the most interesting thing I read was an excerpt from a forthcoming book that came out, which basically chronicled Sal Khan considering how to engage with AI, or if to engage with AI, and this frankly excruciating sounding process through which he decides to participate with OpenAI and comes up or tries to come up with a responsible AI math tutor. And the depth of insights, the grappling with both the potential strengths and the potential downsides was just really quite impressive, and something I always like to see. And it sounds like you're encouraging us to do that in our work today.
Yes, it does. This is Sal Khan of the Khan Academy?
Exactly.
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
OpenAI approached him and said, hey, we want to do a thing. And for a while he said, no, thank you, because, this is his baby. But then he decided to participate. And I just hadn't seen that depth. I'd seen AI hype, AI in school hype, and I'd seen, frankly, some of what a writer I know and respect named Holly Corby called sensationalistic skepticism, which is also a danger, right? But this is a piece. This is a piece, and again, it was an excerpt from a book, so it wasn't even enterprise story. But it had that. That's the depth that comes to mind when I hear you talk about craftsmanship around journalism.
Yeah, that's a great example. So this book is yet to come out. It's coming out.
Forthcoming.
Sounds great.
I'll find it and send you a link to it. In the meantime, though, I appreciate this discussion so much. I just can't even tell you. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your insights. Todd Oppenheimer, tell us the name of the magazine that you publish now so we can find it online.
Well, it's just called Craftsmanship, and it's at craftsmanship.net. We also have a Substack platform also called Craftsmanship, where we publish some of our smaller things. But at the website, craftsmanship.net, we have a number of extremely long pieces on fascinating topics. Some of them, you won't have heard of. So we have sometimes a little trouble getting an audience for them. We have one that I encourage everyone to read just for the beauty of the writing. We published it a month or two ago, and I think we need to change the name. I think it's called Biology's Unseen Craft. And it's about a diatom ranger. Do you know what diatoms are?
No idea.
Neither did I until the writer brought it, but it's fascinating. They're microscopic algae that exist in all kinds of mud puddles and tide pools and things like that. So they're, nose around. When we once won a little award, my favorite was my favorite simply because of the comment of the judge. He said, "Be careful, this website's addictive." So I thought that was pretty good. I'll take that over a Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah, exactly. Todd Oppenheimer, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. I hope it's of help to all kinds of folks.
I'm sure it will be. Bye for now.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.